My name is Maya Jenkins, and I am 32 years old. My ex-husband took everything from me: my car, my home, even my children. With only $80 in my pocket, I was forced to start over from nothing. Everyone thought I was finished, including him. But when an unexpected opportunity changed my life, the man who destroyed my world was the last person prepared for what came next. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked shut, with a sound that echoed like a gunshot over the pouring Atlanta rain. I stood on the front porch of the sprawling brick suburban home I had paid the mortgage on for 6 straight years. The freezing downpour soaked through my thin cotton jacket, instantly pasting my natural hair flat against my forehead. At my feet sat a cheap black plastic trash bag. It contained 3 pairs of sweatpants, 2 faded shirts, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. That was my entire life. That was everything I was allowed to take from the home I had built with my own 2 hands, an endless sacrifice. Through the decorative glass panels of the custom front door, I could see Darnell. My husband of 8 years stood in the warm, dry foyer. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. The very same suit I had bought for him to celebrate his promotion to retail executive vice president last month. He looked pristine. He looked arrogant. He looked like a complete stranger. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows across his face as he slowly opened the door just a few inches. He did not look at me with any trace of the love he had promised before God and our families on our wedding day. He looked at me like a nuisance he wanted to sweep off his porch forever. His hand emerged from the narrow gap, and he casually tossed a crumpled $20 bill onto the soaking wet welcome mat. It fluttered down and landed right next to my soaking wet shoes, where the only other money I had to my name, a grand total of $60, rested in my damp pocket. "Take your $80 and call an Uber, Maya," Darnell said, his voice devoid of any emotion or remorse. "The house, the SUV, the kids, they stay with me. Failures do not get custody." He moved to close the door, but I threw my entire body weight against the heavy wood, stopping it. Rainwater dripped into my eyes, blurring my vision as I stared up at the man I had sacrificed my entire youth for. "I worked double shifts at the laboratory for 4 years to put you through that MBA program," I screamed, my voice cracking over the loud sound of the thunder rumbling overhead. "I mixed chemical formulas in our cramped apartment kitchen until my hands literally bled. I paid for every expensive textbook, every tailored suit, every late-night networking dinner, so you could climb that corporate ladder and play the part of a successful executive. You are nothing without my sweat and my money." Darnell just laughed, a hollow, cruel sound that made my stomach churn with disgust. Before he could speak, another voice rang out from the grand hallway behind him. It was Beatrice, my mother-in-law. She stepped into the bright light wearing her pristine Sunday church clothes and her signature pearl necklace, the very same necklace I had paid for when she cried about wanting to look respectable for the church anniversary gala because she had mismanaged her own pension. "You mixed oils in a blender, little girl," Beatrice sneered, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You think whipping up some hair grease in a kitchen makes you a boss or an entrepreneur? My son is a vice president now. He sits in boardrooms with the elite of Atlanta. He needs a wife who belongs in those wealthy circles, not a loud working-class woman who constantly smells like shea butter and struggle. You dragged him down for years with your little hobby business. Now he is finally free to rise to his true potential without your heavy baggage holding him back." I stared at the woman I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner for year after year, the woman whose light bills I had paid when she claimed her fixed income was simply not enough to survive on. I had carried the financial weight of this entire family on my back, working day and night to build my cosmetic chemistry business Crown and Glory. I had formulated natural hair care products specifically designed for Black women, pouring my heart and soul into every single bottle I produced, and this was my ultimate reward: being tossed out into a violent storm while they stood in the comfort and warmth of my hard work. I opened my mouth to respond to her vile words, but the humiliation was far from over. Tasha, my sister-in-law, stepped into the entryway right beside her mother. I looked down, and my heart shattered all over again. Tasha was wearing my custom red bottom heels, the shoes I had saved up for months to buy for my 30th birthday. The shoes I had only worn twice because I was always too busy working to go out. Keep your voice down, Maya, Tasha said, smirking as she adjusted her freshly pressed hair, a style she had paid for using my credit card just last week. You are disturbing the peace and quiet of our neighborhood. Chloe is upstairs right now reading Jordan and Aaliyah a bedtime story. They actually like her, you know. She bought them both brand new PS5 consoles and those exclusive Jordan sneakers they have been begging for instead of forcing them to do chores and read educational books all weekend like you always do. She knows how to properly treat them and give them the lifestyle they deserve. The mention of my children, Jordan and Aaliyah, felt like a physical knife twisting deep in my chest. My sweet 10-year-old boy and my beautiful 8-year-old girl. I remembered rocking them to sleep, making sure they had everything they needed. Darnell had spent the last 2 months slowly manipulating their innocent minds, showering them with extravagant gifts, bought with my business profits, and telling them terrible lies about how my long hours at the lab meant I did not love them. He had created a twisted narrative where he was the fun, generous parent, and I was the absent, strict villain who only cared about work. And now Chloe, his wealthy, 28-year-old coworker, his mistress, was upstairs playing mother to my precious children. Chloe Sterling came from massive generational wealth. She had never worked a hard day in her entire life, and she constantly looked down on anyone who had to earn their keep through honest labor. She was exactly the kind of shiny status symbol Darnell and Beatrice worshipped and craved. Darnell pushed Tasha aside roughly and glared at me with absolute hatred. You are a homeless, broke failure, Maya. You have no legal claim to anything in this house because you were too stupid and too trusting to put your name on the property deed when we bought it. You actually believed me when I said my corporate job offered better loan rates, and it would be cheaper to keep your name off the paperwork. Now get off my property immediately before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a deafening thud. The deadbolt clicked once again, locking me out of my own life. I stood on the porch, shivering uncontrollably as the freezing rain soaked through to my bones. The intense anger inside me burned so hot I thought it might actually vaporize the raindrops landing on my skin. I did not scream anymore. I did not beg or plead for them to open the door. I slowly bent down and picked up the wet $20 bill from the soaked welcome mat. I smoothed the paper money out with my completely numb fingers. I needed to act fast, think strategically. Darnell thought he had won this war because he held the physical assets and the children, but he did not know I was the sole authorized signatory on the primary business account for Crown and Glory. I pulled my phone from my pocket, sheltering the screen from the heavy rain with my jacket. My hands shook violently as I opened my secure banking application. I just needed to freeze the business funds before he realized he could not access them without my approval. With that money, I would hire the best lawyer in Atlanta tomorrow, and I would fight him tooth and nail for my children and my company. The app slowly loaded. The bright screen illuminated my wet face in the darkness of the stormy night. I blinked repeatedly, trying to clear the rainwater from my eyes, because what I was seeing simply could not be real. A bold red notification popped up on the very center of my screen, demanding my attention. Alert. Transfer of $150,000 from Crown and Glory business checking to Darnell Jenkins' personal account, completed 45 minutes ago. I stared blankly at the massive zero balance displayed on the screen. He had somehow forged my digital authorization. He had drained every single penny I had meticulously saved for the upcoming company expansion. Darnell had not just taken my house, my car, and my children. He had completely robbed me blind, leaving me standing on a dark porch in the pouring rain with exactly $80 to my name and a pathetic trash bag full of old clothes. The rain continued to batter the screen of my phone as I stared at the zero balance. Darnell had not just locked me out in the storm, he had funded his legal war chest with my blood and sweat. Less than 48 hours later, I found myself sitting in the sterile, freezing chambers of the Fulton County Family Court. I wore a borrowed blazer that was slightly too tight across my shoulders, while Darnell sat at the petitioner table, looking like a magazine cover in a custom-tailored navy suit. Beside him sat a high-priced attorney, whose retainer alone probably cost more than my first laboratory setup. This man was paid for with my stolen $150,000. The lawyer cleared his throat and immediately launched into a character assassination so vicious it took my breath away. He painted a picture of an unhinged, erratic woman who abandoned her maternal duties for a delusional garage hobby. Your Honor, my client has been the sole stabilizing force in these children's lives, the attorney declared, his voice dripping with practiced concern. While Mr. Jenkins was securing an executive position and providing a stable environment, Mrs. Jenkins was exhibiting severe mental instability. She would lock herself in a hazardous makeshift laboratory for 16 hours a day, completely neglecting the emotional and physical needs of 10-year-old Jordan and 8-year-old Aaliyah. We are requesting an emergency restraining order and immediate full custody to protect the children from her erratic outbursts. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream that those 16-hour days were exactly how I paid the mortgage, how I kept the lights on, while Darnell was busy buying expensive lunches for his mistress Chloe. But my court-appointed public defender placed a warning hand on my arm, silently begging me to remain calm. The judge, a stern older woman, peered over her glasses at the paperwork before her. Let us move to the issue of the marital assets and the business in question, she said, her tone flat and bureaucratic. Mr. Jenkins claims sole ownership of the entity known as Crown and Glory. Darnell adjusted his expensive silk tie and nodded respectfully toward the bench. Yes, Your Honor. I built the brand from the ground up. His attorney smoothly slid a pristine leather-bound folder across the polished desk toward the judge. Inside were beautifully forged, limited liability company documents listing Darnell Jenkins as the sole founder, chief executive, and lead chemical formulator. They had backdated the paperwork utilizing a loophole in the corporate registry to erase my name entirely. The sheer audacity of the lie snapped the last thread of my self-control. I shoved my chair back, the wooden legs scraping violently against the linoleum floor. You formulated it, I yelled, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. I pointed a shaking finger directly at Darnell, who maintained a chillingly serene expression. Darnell, you do not even know the difference between Jamaican black castor oil and jojoba oil. You do not even know the melting point of raw shea butter. You stole my physical formulation notebook right off the kitchen counter while I was asleep after a 14-hour shift. You stole the formulas I created with my own 2 hands. The judge slammed her wooden gavel down hard. Order in my courtroom. Mrs. Jenkins, you will restrain yourself, or I will have the bailiffs remove you immediately. I stood there, chest heaving, chest aching, as I looked at the man I had vowed to love for better or worse. He looked back at me with a perfect mask of victimhood, shaking his head slowly, as if he pitied my supposed mental breakdown. The judge, blinded completely by his polished corporate presentation and my desperate, ragged appearance, jotted down a note that I knew would seal my fate. My public defender scrambled to regain some ground. Your Honor, we have a character witness who can testify to my client's dedication as a mother and her role as the primary financial provider. I called Jamal Robinson to the stand. My older brother Jamal walked through the heavy courtroom doors. He wore his best Sunday church suit, though it hung a little loose on his frame. Jamal was a blue-collar transit worker, a man who worked with his hands and prided himself on his fierce protection of his family. He took the oath and sat in the witness box, shooting me a reassuring glance that briefly warmed my freezing heart. Jamal spoke clearly about how I cooked every meal for Jordan and Aaliyah, how I was the one attending the parent-teacher conferences, how I built my cosmetic business from scratch to ensure those children would have college funds. For a brief moment, the truth hung in the air, undeniable and raw. Then Darnell's high-priced lawyer stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. He approached the witness box like a predator cornering prey. Mr. Robinson, you claim your sister is a responsible, stabilizing force. But let us talk about your own respectability and judgment, shall we? Is it not true that 3 years ago you were suspended from your transit job for a severe protocol violation involving an altercation? Jamal stiffened, his large hands gripping the railing of the witness box. That was a misunderstanding. A passenger was harassing a young woman on my bus, and I stepped in to protect her. The transit authority cleared me and reinstated my position completely. But there is a permanent mark on your public record detailing your aggressive and volatile behavior. The lawyer pressed, his voice rising in theatrical judgment. And you expect this court to believe your assessment of a stable household when you yourself have a documented history of violence. Is it possible, Mr. Robinson, that aggressive, erratic behavior simply runs in your family? Objection, my public defender said weakly. Overruled, the judge snapped. I watched in absolute horror as the lawyer ruthlessly cross-examined my brother, twisting a moment of genuine heroism into a smear campaign. He used every respectability politics trick in the book to paint Jamal as an uneducated, dangerous blue-collar worker whose testimony could not possibly be trusted over that of a polished retail executive like Darnell. Jamal stepped down from the stand, his face tight with humiliation and suppressed anger. He had come to save me, and Darnell had used his wealth to humiliate my brother on public record. The judge did not even hesitate when delivering her ruling. Based on the evidence presented and the concerning behavior exhibited in this very courtroom, I am granting emergency full custody to Darnell Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins, you are barred from the marital residence, and you are ordered to stay 50 yards away from Crown and Glory headquarters. Temporary visitation will be reconsidered at the next hearing in 60 days. The gavel fell, sounding like a coffin slamming shut. 60 days, 60 days without seeing my babies. Darnell stood up, buttoning his jacket, and shot me one final victorious smirk before walking out of the courtroom, surrounded by his legal entourage. He had taken my house, my car, my children, and my dignity. That night, the torrential Atlanta rain continued to fall, mirroring the absolute devastation of my reality. I sat on a sagging mattress in a cheap, neon-lit motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled of old smoke and strong industrial bleach. The $80 I had to my name had barely covered a two-night stay and a cheap cup of instant noodles. I pulled my knees to my chest, letting the tears fall freely in the dark, cramped room. The weight of the injustice threatened to crush my spirit entirely. Darnell had won. He had manipulated the legal system, exploited my dedication to our family, and walked away with everything I had built. Chloe was probably tucking my children into their beds right now, playing the role of the perfect, wealthy stepmother, while I sat in a roach-infested motel. But as the initial wave of despair washed over me, the anger returned, burning hotter and brighter than before. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and reached into the plastic trash bag I had brought from the porch. Wrapped in a pair of old sweatpants was my cracked secondary laptop. It was an old machine I used for backing up data years ago. Darnell had confiscated my primary workstation, but he had forgotten about this outdated piece of hardware. I plugged the laptop into the flickering wall outlet and waited for it to boot up. The screen glowed to life, casting a harsh blue light across my tear-stained face. I connected to the unstable motel wireless network and logged into my secure cloud storage drive. My heart pounded against my ribs as I navigated through the encrypted folders. Darnell had stolen the physical formulation notebook from the kitchen counter, assuming it held the golden key to the Crown and Glory empire. He thought he had outsmarted a woman he considered nothing more than a kitchen mixer. He believed he possessed the exact chemical compound that was currently generating thousands of five-star reviews from Black women across the country. I opened the main directory and clicked on the folder labeled Formulation Drafts. I scrolled down past the early experiments and the failed mixtures until I found the exact document that mirrored the physical notebook he had stolen. I opened the file and read the chemical breakdown line by line. I checked the preservative ratios, the emulsifying agents, and the thermal stability charts. A slow, chilling smile began to spread across my face, entirely replacing the tears. The cold, damp motel room suddenly felt like the command center of an impending war. Darnell, in his arrogant rush to steal my empire, had grabbed the notebook containing draft number 4. He had presented it to the judge. He had likely already sent it to the manufacturing plant to begin mass production under his newly established fraudulent LLC. He thought he had the final formula. He thought he had stolen the magic. But I was the chemist. I was the one who had spent thousands of hours analyzing molecular structures and compound longevity. I stared at the screen, my smile widening into something dangerous and absolute. Darnell did not steal the final formula. He stole a highly unstable prototype. Draft number 4 was a ticking time bomb, and he had just strapped it directly to his own chest. The rain outside my motel window drummed a steady, relentless beat against the thin glass. I sat there in the silence, letting the glow of the laptop screen wash over me. Darnell Jenkins thought he could erase me. He thought he could strip me of my title as a mother and as a founder, leaving me with nothing but $80 and a shattered reputation. I underestimated the very foundation of who I was. I did not just stumble into creating $1 million brand by accident. I engineered it through sheer brilliance and unyielding perseverance. And now the man who mocked my intellect was about to learn a brutal lesson in cosmetic chemistry. I closed the laptop carefully, feeling the cool metal beneath my fingertips. The profound sense of helplessness that had crippled me in the courtroom completely evaporated. Tomorrow, I would use the remaining funds I possessed to secure a meeting with someone who understood intellectual property warfare better than anyone in Atlanta. Darnell had the stolen car, the stolen house, and my precious children under his roof for now. But I had the actual science, the true intellectual property, and the unshakable resolve of a mother who had been pushed too far. He wanted to play a high-stakes corporate game with my life. I was going to let him play it all the way to his own spectacular ruin. The countdown had officially begun, and Darnell was entirely oblivious to the absolute destruction waiting for him at the finish line. The $80 I had to my name vanished with terrifying speed. Between extending the motel room for one more night and buying a cheap prepaid phone to replace the one Darnell had undoubtedly disconnected, I was completely out of funds by the very next afternoon. I needed cash immediately. I walked 3 miles down the rain-slicked highway until I found a 24-hour diner glowing like a greasy beacon in the gray twilight. A faded help wanted sign hung in the grease-stained window. I walked in, swallowed my pride, and begged the manager for a graveyard shift, starting that exact night. He took one look at my desperate eyes and handed me a stained brown apron. The transition from chief executive to late-night waitress was a brutal shock to the system. My feet throbbed inside my damp sneakers as I navigated the sticky linoleum floors, balancing heavy trays of scrambled eggs and black coffee. The diner was a haven for truck drivers, exhausted hospital workers, and the occasional late-night reveler. The air was thick with the smell of old frying oil and stale bleach. Every muscle in my body ached from the physical labor and the emotional trauma of the past 48 hours. But I pushed through the pain. I kept my head down, focusing entirely on the rhythmic mechanics of the job. I needed the tips. I needed to survive the night so I could execute my plan in the morning. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the brass bell above the diner entrance chimed loudly, piercing through the low hum of the late-night crowd. I was wiping down a corner booth, my back to the door, when I heard a familiar, obnoxious laugh. I froze. The wet rag in my hand suddenly felt like a lead weight. I slowly turned my head and my heart instantly slammed against my ribcage. Darnell and Chloe were standing in the entryway, shaking off the light drizzle. They were completely overdressed for a roadside diner, clearly arriving straight from some elite Atlanta charity gala. Darnell wore a custom midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, while Chloe was draped in a clinging silver silk gown that pooled around her expensive heels. They looked wealthy, untouched by the harsh realities of the world, and completely out of place among the tired truck drivers and exhausted shift workers. But it was not their expensive clothes that made my blood boil. As Chloe turned her head to survey the dingy restaurant, the harsh fluorescent lights caught a brilliant flash of fire at her ears. She was wearing my diamond anniversary earrings. Darnell had bought those specific 2-carat emerald-cut diamonds for our 5th wedding anniversary. He had secured them with the first major dividend payout from Crown and Glory, my company, my hard work. And now those very same diamonds were swinging from the earlobes of the woman who had helped destroy my family. Darnell spotted me almost immediately. I saw the initial shock register in his eyes, quickly replaced by a dark, triumphant gleam. He leaned down and whispered something into Chloe's ear. She looked over at me, her perfectly painted red lips curling into a vicious sneer. They did not retreat. They did not show an ounce of shame. Instead, they deliberately walked straight toward the section of the diner I was currently assigned to serving. They slid into a booth right in the middle of my section. Darnell casually draped his tuxedo jacket over the vinyl seat, while Chloe placed her designer clutch on the table. I stood completely still for 3 seconds, fighting the overwhelming urge to lunge across the aisle and rip my diamonds right out of her ears. But I remembered the ticking time bomb of draft number 4. I remembered the ultimate goal. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, forced my face into a mask of absolute indifference, and walked over to their table. "Good morning," I said, my voice flat and mechanical. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Chloe looked me up and down, taking in my stained brown apron, my unstyled natural hair, and my exhausted eyes. She let out a sharp, condescending laugh that carried across the quiet diner. "Look at you, Maya," she sneered, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the sticky table. "You look absolutely pathetic. Darnell told me you were nothing but a glorified kitchen maid before he elevated you. But I never truly believed him until this very moment." I ignored her completely, focusing my gaze on the faded menu stuck behind the napkin dispenser. "We have coffee and water," I stated flatly, refusing to engage in her petty high school bullying. Darnell leaned back in his booth, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with an expression of profound pity that made me want to vomit. "This is where you belong, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with arrogant authority. "Serving people like us. You always lacked the vision required for corporate greatness. You were too small-minded. Now you are finally exactly where you were always meant to be." Before I could even process his delusion, Chloe reached across the table. She grabbed a half-full glass of cheap house red wine that the previous customer had left behind. With a flick of her wrist and a malicious smirk, she intentionally tipped the glass over. The dark red liquid spilled rapidly across the table, dripping down the edge and splashing directly onto my worn-out sneakers. "Clean it up, waitstaff," Chloe commanded, her voice loud enough to turn heads at the neighboring booths. "Darnell was right about you. You really belong on your hands and knees scrubbing up after your betters." The diner went dead silent. The few customers present stopped eating and watched the scene unfold with uncomfortable tension. Darnell reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it casually onto the table, letting it land right in the middle of the spreading puddle of spilled red wine. "Keep the change, Maya," Darnell said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Buy yourself a new blender. Maybe you can start your little kitchen hobby all over again from scratch." The air in the room felt thick and electric. I could feel the eyes of every exhausted worker and patron burning into my back. This was the moment Darnell and Chloe expected me to snap. They expected the angry black woman stereotype. They expected me to yell, to scream, to throw the coffee pot and get myself arrested for assault. They wanted me to prove the exact narrative Darnell had sold to the family court judge. They wanted me to validate my own destruction. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I looked down at the spilled wine soaking into the crisp $100 bill. I felt a strange, absolute calm settle over my entire body, the static strike of a predator analyzing its prey. I slowly reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out a clean white rag. I calmly and methodically wiped the spilled wine off the table, absorbing the dark liquid, until the surface was perfectly clean. I picked up the soaking wet $100 bill, holding it by the corner. I folded it neatly and slipped it directly into my front pocket. Then I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders. I looked dead into Darnell's eyes, locking his gaze with a terrifying intensity that made his triumphant smile falter for a fraction of a second. I did not look at Chloe at all, denying her the validation of my attention. "Thank you for your generous contribution to my empire, Darnell," I said, my voice low, smooth, and utterly devoid of fear. "Enjoy the wine." I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not look back. I walked straight into the back kitchen, leaving them sitting in the uncomfortable silence of a confrontation they had initiated, but utterly failed to win. I spent the remainder of my graveyard shift scrubbing dishes and counting down the minutes until sunrise. The wet $100 bill rested heavily in my pocket, a tangible piece of ammunition handed to me by the very enemy I was preparing to slaughter. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the sky over Atlanta finally began to lighten, turning from charcoal gray to a pale, bruised purple. My shift officially ended. I handed my stained apron back to the manager, washed my hands in the industrial sink, and walked out into the cool morning air. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets slick and clean. I did not walk back to the dismal motel. I walked straight to the nearest busy intersection and hailed a bright yellow cab. I gave the driver an address located in the heart of the wealthy financial district. The ride cost me exactly $35 out of Darnell's wet $100 bill. The cab pulled up in front of a towering monolith of sleek blue glass and steel. I stepped out of the vehicle, completely ignoring the strange looks I received from the polished corporate executives rushing past me on the sidewalk. I was still wearing my damp sneakers and my faded sweatpants, but my posture was rigid and unyielding. I walked through the revolving glass doors across the pristine marble lobby and straight into the private elevator bank. I pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The doors opened to a stunning reception area decorated in minimalist white and silver. This was the headquarters of Valerie Thompson. She was widely known as the most ruthless predatory intellectual property attorney in the entire state of Georgia. She was a woman who dismantled corporate giants for sport, and I had done her a massive, undeniable favor 3 years ago by providing the precise chemical analysis she needed to win a landmark pharmaceutical lawsuit. She owed me. I bypassed the receptionist entirely and pushed open the heavy frosted glass door to Valerie's private corner office. Valerie sat behind a massive desk of reclaimed walnut, looking impeccable in a sharp white power suit. She looked up from her documents, her sharp eyes taking in my disheveled appearance without a single ounce of judgment. "Valerie," I said, my voice steady. "Darnell took the house. I took the kids. He drained the accounts and he filed fraudulent LLC documents to steal crown and glory." Valerie did not gasp. She did not offer useless sympathy. She slowly closed the file she was reading and steepled her manicured fingers, resting her chin on her hands. A dangerous, predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. She reached into the deep bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a thick, heavy leather-bound portfolio. She placed it deliberately on the center of her desk and slid it smoothly across the polished wood toward me. "They took an empty LLC, Maya," Valerie said, her voice vibrating with lethal anticipation. "They stole a hollow shell and a defective draft. They have absolutely no idea what we locked inside the blind trust 2 years ago." I placed my hand flat on the cool leather of the portfolio. Valerie slid toward me, feeling the heavy weight of the legal ammunition I had carefully hidden away. While Darnell was busy playing executive and showing off his leased luxury cars to his golf buddies, I had been preparing for the worst-case scenario. I had known deep down that a man who resented my success would eventually try to claim it as his own. Valerie opened the portfolio, revealing the pristine watermarked documents inside. These papers were the culmination of my actual genius. When I first synthesized the revolutionary stabilizing compound that made Crown and Glory products so effective, I immediately brought the data to Valerie. Under her strict legal guidance, we had filed the true foundational patents, not under my name, and certainly not under Darnell's, but under an impenetrable blind trust. The LLC Darnell had just fraudulently claimed in front of that family court judge was nothing more than a marketing shell. It was a glorified checking account and a brand logo. It held absolutely zero ownership of the actual chemical patents. "Darnell thinks he is a mastermind," Valerie continued, tapping her pen against the desk. "He thinks his tailored suits and his aggressive courtroom tactics have secured him a multi-million-dollar cosmetic empire. But he is trying to drive a high-performance vehicle without the engine. The moment he attempts to mass-produce that defective draft number 4, he submitted to the court, the formula will completely destabilize." I nodded, sinking into the plush leather chair opposite her desk. The physical exhaustion of the graveyard shift was finally catching up to me, but my mind was firing on all cylinders. "He is already negotiating a buyout with Lumiere Cosmetics," I told her, recalling a hushed phone call I had overheard Darnell making last week. "He wants to sell the entire brand and cash out before anyone realizes he does not possess the scientific knowledge to maintain the product line." Valerie's predatory smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. "Oh, this is going to be exceptionally beautiful," she murmured, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of impending corporate slaughter. "If he attempts to sell intellectual property he does not actually own to a global conglomerate like Lumiere across state lines, he will trigger federal wire fraud and corporate espionage charges. We are not just going to take your children and your money back, Maya. We are going to let him build his own spectacular prison cell brick by brick." I looked down at the wet $100 bill I had placed on the edge of her desk. The very money Darnell had thrown at me in a pathetic attempt to break my spirit was now paying for the cab ride that brought me to his ultimate executioner. "We wait," I stated, making the executive decision. "We do not file an immediate injunction. We do not warn him. We let him sign those fraudulent manufacturing contracts. We let him spend the stolen money. We let him climb as high as his arrogant ego will take him." Valerie closed the portfolio with a sharp, definitive snap. Exactly. The higher the monkey climbs the tree, the harder the concrete hits when he falls. "Welcome back to the war room, Maya. Let us begin the corporate autopsy." Valerie poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and slid one across the desk. The strategy was simple but required absolute ironclad patience. Darnell and Chloe were currently living a spectacular lie, painting Atlanta with money they did not actually possess. The social circles they desperately craved were finally paying attention entirely because of the rumors surrounding Crown and Glory. My former mother-in-law, Beatrice, was having the time of her life. She was parading around her massive mega-church every Sunday, wearing brand new designer hats and sitting in the front row VIP section. I knew this because my brother Jamal still attended that church. He told me Beatrice was bragging loud enough for the choir to hear that her successful son was about to sign a $20 million buyout deal with Lumiere Cosmetics. She told the entire congregation that her son was a genius formulator who had finally dropped his deadweight wife to step into his divine season of prosperity. Tasha was just as obnoxious. My sister-in-law was posting daily videos on her social media flaunting shopping bags and driving a luxury car Darnell had leased for her. Her videos were filled with subliminal shade directed squarely at me. She would stare into her phone camera, adjusting her newly purchased hair extensions, and tell her followers how bitter broke exes always try to hold back successful men. She boasted about generational family wealth, completely ignoring the fact that just 6 months ago I had paid her overdue electric bill so she would not sit in the dark. They were entirely drunk on the illusion of my success, claiming it as their own birthright. I sat in Valerie's office watching the traffic move silently on the street far below. My instinct was to file an injunction immediately to tear down their fake empire before they could spend another dime. But Valerie shook her head, leaning back in her leather chair. "Let him fly high," Maya. Valerie said, her voice deadly calm. "If we sue him now, we just get a messy divorce settlement and a brand caught in legal limbo. We let him sign those acquisition papers. We let him leverage everything he owns against a formula he does not understand. The higher he climbs, the harder the concrete hits when gravity finally takes over. To survive the wait." Valerie did something I never expected. She personally provided me with a private, unrestricted loan from her own capital fund. It was enough money to secure a small, discreet commercial space on the industrial outskirts of the city. I silently rented an underground concrete laboratory out of sight from Darnell's corporate spies. I bought used but functional mixing equipment, sanitized every inch of the space, and went to work. This was where the true magic happened. Free from Darnell's constant belittling comments and the suffocating atmosphere of my old kitchen, I began mixing the true perfected formula. This was the chemical structure I had locked inside the blind trust, the formula that actually stabilized the volatile raw ingredients. I poured the rich golden liquids into sleek matte black bottles. I built a completely new, untraceable brand name from the ground up. I called it Aura Noir. It represented stepping out of the shadows and claiming my own power. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the corner of the lab, fueled by pure determination and the vision of my children's faces. While I was building, Darnell was busy trying to erase my existence. He wanted to sever all ties to my past, and he was ruthless about it. He used his new corporate influence and the massive weight of the impending Lumiere deal to target my family. One rainy afternoon, my phone vibrated on the stainless steel lab table. It was Jamal. His voice sounded heavy and defeated. "Maya, they fired me," Jamal said, the heartbreak evident in every syllable. He had worked for the City Transit Authority for 10 years, climbing his way up the union ladder to become a shift supervisor. He loved his job and he needed the pension. I wiped my gloved hands on a towel, my heart dropping. "What happened, Jamal?" I asked. "How could they just fire you?" He let out a shaky breath. "Darnell called the regional director. He claimed I was harassing his family and threatening his new corporate partners. He used that old transit infraction, the one his lawyer brought up in family court, to paint me as a violent risk to public safety. Darnell told them if they kept me on the payroll, he would make sure the Lumiere executives pulled their local investments from the city development fund. The city caved, Maya. They handed me a cardboard box and escorted me out of the depot an hour ago. Tears pricked my eyes. Darnell was not just satisfied with destroying my life, he was systematically dismantling the lives of anyone who stood by me. He wanted to leave me completely isolated with no support system and no allies. I am so sorry, Jamal, I whispered, my voice cracking. I will fix this. I promise you I will fix this. Jamal stopped me before I could spiral into guilt. Do not you dare apologize, Maya, he said, his voice suddenly growing firm and resolute. Darnell did this because he is terrified of you. He knows he is standing on a house of cards, and he is trying to remove the wind. Do not stop fighting. Do not let him win. You stay in that lab and you finish what you started. I will find another job. I will survive. You just make sure that when he falls, he never gets back up. His words poured fresh gasoline on the fire burning inside my chest. I hung up the phone and looked around my underground sanctuary. Row upon row of perfectly formulated Aura Noir bottles stood at attention, like a silent army waiting for my command. Darnell had officially crossed the line from a bitter divorce to total warfare. He had targeted my brother. He had corrupted my children. He had humiliated me in public. The time for waiting was rapidly drawing to a spectacular close. 2 weeks passed in a blur of chemical synthesis and quiet strategic planning with Valerie. Darnell was officially moving forward with the Lumiere Cosmetics acquisition. The business journals were already leaking rumors about the historic $20 million payout. Darnell was giving interviews to local magazines talking about his innovative genius and his relentless pursuit of excellence. I was posing for photographs in his expensive suits, standing in front of my old laboratory equipment. I was in the middle of mixing a large master batch of Aura Noir, carefully measuring the temperature of the stabilizing agents, when my burner phone suddenly rang. It was an unrecognized out-of-state number. I lowered the heat on the mixing vat, pulled off my protective goggles, and answered the call. Miss Jenkins, a crisp, authoritative male voice spoke through the speaker. My name is Arthur Vance. I am the Vice President of Acquisitions at Lumiere Cosmetics. I stood perfectly still, the hum of the laboratory equipment fading into the background. Yes, Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my tone professional and neutral. How can I help you? There was a brief pause on the line, a heavy silence filled with corporate anxiety. I am calling you off the record, Miss Jenkins. Your ex-husband Darnell is currently in our boardroom offering us the complete buyout of Crown and Glory. He claims to have the proprietary rights and the comprehensive understanding of the chemical formulations. However, our internal laboratory technicians have been running stress tests on the physical chemical samples he provided. We are observing some highly concerning data. Arthur Vance cleared his throat, sounding deeply unsettled. The emulsion process is breaking down under standard ultraviolet light exposure. The pH balance is fluctuating wildly. Frankly, Miss Jenkins, the chemical samples he provided are showing strange instability that we cannot mathematically account for. Mr. Jenkins cannot explain the molecular failure. He directed us to contact you, stating you were merely a former lab assistant who might have mislabeled a batch during your departure. I looked down at the pristine, perfectly balanced beaker of Aura Noir resting on my stainless steel table, the golden liquid caught overhead light reflecting pure, unadulterated perfection. I pictured Darnell sweating in the boardroom surrounded by executives, realizing his stolen crown was melting into dark, toxic sludge. He had stolen draft number 4 exactly as I had predicted. The 90-day degradation cycle was finally kicking in. I smiled. It was a cold smile that reached my eyes. A profound sense of vindication settled deep in my bones. Miss Jenkins, your ex-husband is offering us Crown and Glory. But the chemical samples he provided are showing strange instability. That is because he brought you a ticking time bomb, sir. I disconnected the call before Arthur Vance could ask another panicked question. The silence in my underground laboratory felt incredibly sweet. But the war was not over yet. Less than 2 hours later, my burner phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Darnell. It was a sterile, commanding demand to meet him at an upscale artisan coffee shop in Buckhead at 3 o'clock. The message came with the cruel addendum stating he was bringing Jordan and Aaliyah. If I wanted to see my own children, I had to be exactly on time and alone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had not seen my babies in 32 excruciating days. I stripped off my protective gloves, washed the chemical residue from my hands, and changed into a clean but simple outfit. I did not want to look desperate, but I also refused to look like I was competing with Chloe's stolen wealth. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. It was a pretentious glass-walled building filled with lush green plants and people conducting high-level business meetings over $10 lattes. I stood near the back corner, keeping my eyes locked on the front door. At exactly 3 o'clock, a massive black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. Darnell stepped out first, wearing a light gray custom suit that screamed corporate arrogance. Then the back doors opened. My breath caught in my throat. Jordan and Aaliyah stepped onto the sidewalk. They did not look like the carefree children who used to help me stick shipping labels on boxes in our old living room. They were dressed in stiff, uncomfortable designer clothing. Jordan wore a miniaturized version of a high-end streetwear outfit with heavy chain necklaces that looked ridiculous on a 10-year-old boy. Aaliyah was squeezed into a stiff designer dress and shoes she could barely walk in. Her beautiful natural hair had been painfully pulled back and sprayed with heavy chemicals. They looked like expensive little dolls completely stripped of their actual childhoods. Chloe had clearly dressed them using my children as living props to flaunt the wealth Darnell had stolen from me. As they walked through the glass doors, I stepped forward, my arms aching to hold them. Jordan, Ali, I called out, my voice trembling with desperate love. They looked at me, but their eyes held a chilling distance. There was no joyful running, no tight hugs. They stood rigidly behind Darnell, looking at my plain clothes and my tired face. Darnell placed a heavy hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Go ahead, son. Tell your mother what Chloe bought you yesterday," Darnell prompted, his voice dripping with condescension. Jordan looked down at his expensive shoes. "Chloe bought us tickets to Disney World," he mumbled, his voice completely devoid of actual excitement. "And she bought me the virtual reality gaming system I wanted." Alia clutched a brand new designer handbag that was entirely too big for an 8-year-old. "Chloe lets us eat ice cream for dinner," Aaliyah added softly, looking away from my eyes. "She says we never have to do homework on weekends anymore because we are rich now." My heart physically ached. They were being actively corrupted, poisoned by empty promises and endless toys. Darnell and Chloe were using pure, unadulterated materialism to buy their affection and erase me from their minds. Darnell smirked, gesturing for the children to sit at a nearby table while he stepped toward me. He guided me to a secluded booth far enough away that the kids could not hear us, but close enough that I could see their sad, confused faces. Darnell sat across from me, signaling a waiter to bring him a sparkling water. He did not ask if I wanted anything. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I tossed them onto the polished wooden table with a heavy thud. I looked down at the thick stack of paper. The front page bore the logo of his expensive law firm. "What is this, Darnell?" I asked, keeping my voice completely steady despite the rage boiling in my veins. "This is your reality check," Maya, Darnell stated, leaning back and adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I am tired of playing games with you. I am tired of you lurking around the edges of my success, trying to find a way to claw back the empire I built." I picked up the first page and scanned the dense legal jargon. It was a comprehensive waiver. "Sign away your rights to alimony and any future claims to crown and glory," Darnell said, his tone sharp and uncompromising. "Relinquish all financial claims to the brand, the manufacturing rights, and the pending Lumiere Cosmetics acquisition. You sign this document right now, and I will let you see the kids every other weekend. I will stop my lawyers from permanently revoking your maternal rights." I stared at him in utter disbelief. "You are trying to blackmail me, using our own children as leverage." "Leverage," I whispered, leaning forward across the table. "You think you can buy my life away with supervised visitation?" Darnell leaned in close, his face contorting into a mask of pure ruthless ambition. "Refuse, and with my new $20 million Lumiere deal, I will bury you in court until they turn 18. I have unlimited funds, Maya. I will drag out the custody hearings for the next 10 years. I will hire a team of psychologists to testify that your living conditions are unfit. I will make sure Jordan and Aaliyah forget your name completely. You have nothing. You are nothing. Sign the paper and take the scraps I am generously offering you or lose them forever. I looked past his shoulder at Jordan and Aaliyah. They were sitting silently at their table, looking completely miserable in their expensive, stiff clothes. My heart was breaking into a million jagged pieces. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. But a true queen does not throw a tantrum when her kingdom is under siege. She strategizes. I knew I had to secure their future. I knew I had to play his game just long enough to let his own arrogance destroy him entirely. Darnell thought he was holding all the cards, but he was legally blind to the trap I had already set. I slowly reached into my worn leather purse. I bypassed the standard blue ballpoint pen sitting at the top and dug deeper. My fingers brushed against the smooth metal casing of a specialized tool I always carried with me from my laboratory days. It was a high-grade thermal friction pen. The ink it produced looked exactly like standard black permanent ink, but it possessed a very unique chemical property. The chemical bonds of the ink were designed to completely break down and erase when exposed to a specific level of heat. I pulled the pen out, clicking the top with my thumb. "You are making a massive mistake, Darnell," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think this piece of paper protects you. You think a signature erases the truth of what you did." Darnell rolled his eyes, tapping his finger impatiently against the signature line of the legal document. "Just sign the damn paper, Maya. Stop trying to sound profound. You lost. Accept it and move on with your pathetic life." I did not argue anymore. I looked at my beautiful children one last time, sending them a silent promise that I would never stop fighting for them. Then I lowered my head and pressed the tip of the thermal friction pen against the crisp white paper. I signed my name flawlessly across the bottom of the document. I flipped to the next page and signed again. I initialed every single page exactly where his expensive lawyers had indicated. The black ink flowed smoothly, leaving a perfect, undeniable record of my surrender. I handed the pen back to Darnell, turning the thick stack of documents around so they faced him. Darnell snatched the paper from the table, instantly victorious. A massive grin broke across his face. He quickly checked the signatures, ensuring every single line was filled. "You finally did one smart thing in your life, Maya," he sneered, standing up from the booth and buttoning his suit jacket. "I will have my legal team file this with the court tomorrow morning. You will get your visitation schedule in the mail. Do not ever try to contact my company or my investors again." He turned his back on me and started walking toward the table where Jordan and Aaliyah were waiting. He was so incredibly arrogant, so blinded by his own perceived victory, that he did not even realize the ground beneath his feet was already crumbling. He was completely unaware that the very ink securing his supposed empire was scientifically designed to disappear into thin air. I had wagered his entire life on stolen property, and he had lost before he even began playing. His downfall was now chemically guaranteed. I stood up from the booth, smoothing down my simple shirt. I walked up right behind him, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the coffee shop like a sharpened blade. "Check the expiration date on your inventory, Darnell," I whispered directly into his ear. Darnell froze mid-step. His shoulders stiffened beneath his expensive jacket. He did not turn around, but I could see the sudden rigid tension in his neck. "Draft number 4 degrades in exactly 90 days," I said, speaking the absolute chemical truth. "It is highly unstable, it turns highly acidic, and you just shipped thousands of units to innocent women all across the country." Darnell stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds. Then he aggressively shook his head, as if physically trying to dislodge my words from his brain. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. "You are bluffing," he muttered, grabbing Jordan's hand and pulling Aaliyah up from her chair by her shoulder. "You are just a bitter broke ex-wife trying to scare me. You have nothing left, Maya." He did not look back as he marched my children out of the coffee shop, pushing them through the heavy glass doors, and back out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. I watched the luxury SUV pull away from the curb, merging into the heavy city traffic. I stood alone in the upscale coffee shop, feeling the comforting weight of the thermal friction pens still resting in my pocket. I knew exactly what would happen when his lawyers put those documents through the high-speed heated scanner at the courthouse tomorrow morning. Every single signature would completely vanish, leaving him with a stack of blank, useless paper. But that was only the beginning of his nightmare. The 90-day expiration clock on draft number 4 had already struck zero. Now it was just a matter of hours until the viral disaster officially detonated. The dawn of the 90th day broke over Atlanta with deceptive calm. I sat alone in my underground laboratory staring at the monitors tracking the online analytics for Crown and Glory. Darnell had pushed his stolen inventory hard. He had bypassed standard quality assurance testing, entirely blinded by the massive purchase orders from national retail chains. He had flooded the market with tens of thousands of sleek black bottles, completely unaware that he had just distributed a highly volatile acid directly into the homes of unsuspecting women. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, the digital dam broke. The first video appeared on a popular social media platform posted by a young college student. She was crying uncontrollably, her hands trembling as she held up a large clump of her own hair. Her scalp was bright red and blistering. She pointed the camera at a half-empty bottle of Crown and Glory resting on her bathroom sink. Within 20 minutes, a second video surfaced, then a dozen more. By 10 o'clock, the algorithm had caught fire and the hashtag Crown and Glory burn was trending globally. Black women across the country were posting horrific testimonies. The chemical compound in draft number 4 had finally reached its thermal degradation point. The emulsifiers completely collapsed, allowing the raw active ingredients to rapidly oxidize. The formula had turned highly acidic, literally melting the keratin bonds of human hair upon contact. Women were describing severe chemical burns, blistering scalps, and hair falling out in massive traumatic clumps the moment they tried to rinse the conditioner down the drain. I watched the disaster unfold on multiple screens, feeling a heavy knot of sorrow for the women who were suffering. Darnell had prioritized his ego over consumer safety. He had refused to hire a legitimate chemist, assuming my formulas were just simple kitchen recipes anyone could follow. Now his sheer arrogant ignorance was causing widespread physical harm. The internet was a raging inferno of furious consumers demanding answers, demanding refunds, and demanding blood. But Darnell was completely oblivious to the digital apocalypse raining down upon his stolen empire. He was too busy funding his mother's delusions of grandeur. It was Sunday morning, and Beatrice was currently hosting her lavish annual women's empowerment brunch at the sprawling megachurch downtown. She had rented out the entire fellowship hall, sparing absolutely no expense. Massive floral arrangements of white orchids and imported lilies cascaded from every table. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the hundreds of women gathered in their Sunday best. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of mimosas and gourmet pastries. Beatrice stood at the center of it all, wearing a custom-tailored lavender suit and a matching wide-brimmed hat that completely blocked the view of the women sitting behind her. She was holding court, basking in the adoration of the congregation. She had spent the entire morning loudly testifying about how the Lord had blessed her son Darnell with incredible corporate prosperity. She told everyone who would listen that Darnell was single-handedly funding this entire extravagant event as a testament to his newly acquired generational wealth. Tasha was right beside her, acting as the official family videographer. My former sister-in-law was pacing the perimeter of the room, shoving her phone camera into the faces of the church elders. She was broadcasting the event live to her followers, loudly bragging about her brother's immense success. She made sure to repeatedly emphasize that Darnell was stepping into a new season of abundance now that he was no longer held back by negative, bitter energy, clearly referencing me. They were completely intoxicated by the illusion of their own superiority, celebrating a victory funded entirely by my stolen intellectual property. They had no idea the ground beneath their designer heels was already crumbling. I pulled my car into the crowded church parking lot, turning off the engine. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple black tailored dress and absolutely no jewelry. I did not need diamonds to project power. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the fellowship hall, stepping into the warm, fragrant air of the extravagant brunch. The room was buzzing with excited chatter and the soft clinking of silverware against fine china. I moved quietly, keeping my footsteps light against the polished hardwood floor. I bypassed the crowded reception tables and walked straight to the back row of pews, sitting down quietly in the shadows. I watched Beatrice strut up the steps to the main podium, adjusting the microphone with a dramatic flourish. She took a deep breath, preparing to deliver her keynote address on faith and financial elevation. As she looked out over the crowd of smiling faces, her gaze swept past the front rows and landed directly on the back pew. She saw me sitting there perfectly still and utterly unbothered. Beatrice stopped dead. Her mouth hung open slightly, and her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edges of the wooden podium. The confident glow vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a mask of furious indignation. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath as the congregation followed her gaze, turning in their seats to see what had caused the grand matriarch to lose her composure. Beatrice tapped the microphone, her voice echoing sharply across the silent hall. Ushers. Beatrice commanded her tone, dropping its warm, theatrical cadence and becoming harsh and authoritative. We have an uninvited guest attempting to disrupt our fellowship. Please remove this woman immediately. This is a private event funded by my son, and we will not tolerate any bitter interruptions trying to steal our joy. Two large men wearing matching dark suits stepped out from the side aisles, moving purposefully toward the back row. Tasha immediately spun around, pointing her phone camera directly at me, clearly hoping to capture a humiliating viral moment of her former sister-in-law being forcefully dragged out of a church brunch. The congregation watched in hushed, scandalized silence, expecting me to shrink away in shame. I did not shrink. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my black dress. I did not raise my voice, but I projected it clearly, letting the acoustics of the massive hall carry every single syllable to the very front row. "You want me out, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Before I leave, why do not you tell the congregation exactly who paid off this church's mortgage 3 years ago when the bank was going to foreclose?" Beatrice froze, her face turning a sudden sickly shade of gray. The ushers stopped dead in their tracks, unsure of how to proceed. A heavy, suffocating silence crashed over the room. The women sitting at the lavish tables exchanged wide-eyed, shocked glances. "Did Darnell do that?" I challenged, taking a slow, deliberate step forward into the light. "Did your genius son write that $500,000 check to save this sanctuary? Or did the girl who smells like shea butter hand you the check directly in the pastor's private office?" The church went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. The congregation stared at Beatrice, waiting for her to deny the accusation, waiting for her to defend her son's honor. But Beatrice could not speak. Her throat worked uselessly, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The devastating truth hung in the air, entirely undeniable. I had saved their church with the very first massive profit margin Crown and Glory had generated while Darnell was busy spending his meager retail salary on expensive watches. The illusion of his supreme financial dominance shattered instantly right in front of her most loyal followers. The profound humiliation painted on Beatrice's face was absolute. Tasha slowly lowered her phone, the smug smile completely erased from her lips as the reality of my words sank in. I looked at the frozen ushers, giving them a polite nod before turning around to walk out on my own terms. Just as my hand pushed open the heavy wooden exit doors, Tasha's phone suddenly started ringing frantically, cutting through the dead silence of the fellowship hall. The caller identification displayed loudly across her screen. It was Chloe. Tasha scrambled to answer the call, her hands shaking visibly. Chloe was screaming so hysterically on the other end of the line that her frantic voice echoed out of the small speaker for everyone nearby to hear. A major A-list celebrity influencer had just posted a crying live stream holding up a sleek black bottle of Crown and Glory and a handful of her broken hair, announcing a massive class action lawsuit against the company. The viral disaster had reached the highest levels of the stratosphere. Darnell was completely finished, and there was absolutely nothing that he could ever possibly do to save his permanently ruined stolen crown right now. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. Within 48 hours of the viral live stream, the massive retail chains that had blindly stocked Crown and Glory began aggressively ripping the sleek black bottles off their shelves. They issued emergency nationwide recalls, prominently displaying hazard warnings at the checkout registers. Darnell was no longer just dealing with angry social media comments. He was facing federal consumer protection investigations, class action lawsuits, and immediate bankruptcy. The $20 million acquisition deal with Lumiere Cosmetics, the golden ticket he had banked his entire stolen empire on, evaporated overnight. The CEO of Lumiere formally suspended all negotiations via a brutal, legally binding email that was leaked directly to the press. The message explicitly stated they would only resume discussions if they could have a face-to-face meeting with the actual chemist who authored the original baseline formula. Darnell was completely trapped. He could not produce the chemist because the chemist was the woman he had actively tried to destroy. His domestic life was imploding just as violently. Chloe was throwing massive hysterical tantrums inside their leased mansion. Her incredibly wealthy father, who had provided the initial capital for Darnell's massive manufacturing run, was absolutely furious at the public relations nightmare. He publicly severed all ties with Darnell, issuing a press release distancing his family from the toxic brand and demanding his entire investment back immediately. Darnell was desperately tearing through his home office, flipping over furniture and ripping open drawers. I was screaming at Chloe to help him find my old laboratory notebooks, frantically searching for the missing chemical stabilizers he was too arrogant to understand in the first place. He honestly believed he could just mix up a quick antidote in his kitchen sink to stop the national bleeding. While Darnell was losing his mind, my burner phone buzzed with frantic messages from Tasha. I ignored them all until I heard frantic pounding on the reinforced steel door of my underground laboratory. I checked the security cameras. Tasha was standing in the alleyway, hyperventilating and looking over her shoulder like a hunted animal. She wore a heavy silk scarf wrapped tightly around her head, an unusual choice for the humid Atlanta weather. I unlocked the door, letting her stumble into the sterile white entry room. "Maya, you have to help me," Tasha gasped, grabbing the edge of my stainless steel workbench to steady herself. Her eyes were wild with raw, unfiltered panic. "You have to give me the neutralizing agent. You have to fix this formula right now." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the metal counter. "I do not have to do anything, Tasha," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You and your brother stole my life. You laughed while he served me divorce papers. You stood in that church on Sunday and bragged about the wealth you helped him steal. Why on earth would I help you now?" "Because I am going to lose everything!" Tasha shrieked, tears welling in her eyes. "I took out massive illicit loans, using my own house as collateral to invest in Darnell's manufacturing run. The bank is going to take my home, Maya. The investors are threatening me, but that is not even the worst part." She reached up with trembling fingers and slowly unwrapped the heavy silk scarf from her head. I felt a momentary flicker of shock. Tasha's beautiful thick hair was completely decimated. The edges were entirely gone, revealing angry red chemical burns blistering across her scalp. Massive, jagged, bald patches covered the crown of her head, where the acidic formula had literally melted the hair follicles right down to the root. She had been secretly using draft number 4, trying to accelerate her own hair growth to look better on camera. "It is burning me," Tasha sobbed, scratching frantically at her inflamed scalp. "It burns constantly and it will not stop falling out." "Darnell said the formula was perfect. He said you were just a jealous hater trying to scare us. Please, Maya, you are a genius. You have to have the antidote. I will give you anything you want." I reached into the top drawer of my workstation and pulled out a small silver hand mirror. I placed it gently on the stainless steel counter, pushing it toward her. "Look at yourself," I commanded softly. Tasha stared down at her ruined reflection, her shoulders heaving with ragged sobs. "Looks like loyalty comes with a price tag." "Tasha," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp whisper, "you blindly trusted a man who steals for a living. You financed a lie. There is no antidote for acid burns, Tasha. The damage is permanent. You are going to have to shave your head completely and pray the follicles eventually recover in a few years. Now get out of my lab before I call the police for trespassing." Tasha stumbled backward, clutching the scarf to her chest. She turned and ran out, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind her. The silence in the lab felt incredibly vindicating, but I knew Darnell was not finished. A cornered rat is always the most dangerous. Less than 4 hours later, Darnell realized I was never going to respond to his frantic emails or calls. He recognized that I held the absolute key to his salvation, and he resorted to his only remaining tactic: pure intimidation. He drove across town to the community center where my colleague Jamal managed the local youth outreach program. Jamal had been my steadfast ally, helping me secure the raw materials to build my new legitimate brand, Aura Noir. Darnell knew Jamal was essential to my operation. I was sitting in my car across the street watching the community center entrance when Darnell pulled up. His luxury vehicle was gone, recently repossessed by the furious leasing company. He was driving a dented rental car. He stormed out of the vehicle, his suit wrinkled and his tie askew, marching aggressively toward Jamal, who was organizing sports equipment near the front doors. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic loser," Darnell snarled, stepping directly into Jamal's personal space. "You are going to call Maya right now and tell her to hand over the proprietary stabilization protocols for the Crown and Glory formula." Jamal stood his ground, calmly holding a basketball. "I do not work for you, Darnell, and I do not take orders from thieves. Walk away before I call security." Darnell laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. "You think you are safe, Jamal? You think you can help my crazy ex-wife ruin my empire and just walk away? I know about the grants you receive for this community center. I have high-powered lawyers on retainer. I will have them invent a massive embezzlement lawsuit against you. I will tie you up in federal litigation for the next 10 years. I will personally ensure this center gets shut down, and your entire reputation is permanently destroyed in this city. You will never work with youth again. You get Maya to give me the real formula quietly, so I can fix this Lumiere deal, or I ruin your life forever." Jamal did not flinch, but I could see the subtle tension in his jaw. Darnell was fighting dirty, using innocent community programs as leverage. It was time to end the game entirely. I stepped out of the shadows from behind the brick pillar near the entrance doors, holding a thick, heavy manila envelope in my right hand. I walked slowly down the concrete steps, the sharp clicking of my heels causing Darnell to spin around in surprise. The arrogant sneer on his face instantly faltered as he took in my calm, composed demeanor. I did not stop walking until I was standing directly between him and Jamal. I did not look at Darnell. I walked right past him and approached his dented rental car parked at the curb. I dropped the heavy manila envelope squarely onto the hood of his vehicle. It landed with a definitive, authoritative thud. Darnell stared at the envelope and then back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and panic. "What is this, Maya?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "What kind of trick are you playing now?" I turned to face him. "That envelope contains your emails begging for help and your written admission that you do not know how the formula works. I forwarded everything directly to the CEO of Lumiere Cosmetics. I included a complete chemical breakdown of your volatile acid. I also sent them a VIP invitation to the press launch of Aura Noir. They are very eager to meet the actual chemist." Darnell leaned against his rental car, his face drained of color as the reality of his ruined empire set in. "I already paid Jamal's legal retainer, Darnell, using the $2 million in advance orders Aura Noir made this morning. You are out of moves." Lumiere Cosmetics had officially suspended the $20 million acquisition entirely. The chief executive officer explicitly demanded a face-to-face meeting strictly with the actual creator of the product. Darnell, Chloe, and Beatrice had absolutely no business being there. Their exclusive invitations had been silently revoked the very moment the horrific viral burn videos hit the internet. But Darnell was far too arrogant and desperate to accept his bitter defeat gracefully. He had aggressively bribed a junior public relations assistant just to physically force his ruined family past the hotel lobby security guards. Now they were hovering near the back of the grand ballroom, desperately trying to corner any Lumiere executive who happened to walk past their hiding spot. Beatrice looked utterly ridiculous standing next to her disgraced son. She was wearing a gaudy rented silver sequined gown that was entirely too small for her body, aggressively trying to project a completely false image of extreme generational wealth to the powerful Atlanta elite. She was furiously fanning herself with a cocktail napkin, her face pulled into a tight artificial smile as the wealthy society photographers completely ignored her entire existence. Chloe stood right next to her, clutching Darnell's trembling arm. She wore a sick, panicked expression beneath her thick, heavy makeup. Her wealthy father had cut them off entirely publicly, severing all business ties with Darnell and aggressively demanding his massive initial investment back. Her luxurious designer lifestyle was rapidly evaporating by the exact second. Darnell was actively scanning the massive, elegant room with pure manic intensity. His expensive custom suit hung awkwardly on his tense frame, his forehead slick with cold, terrified sweat. He was literally sweating actual bullets, facing absolute total corporate bankruptcy and severe federal fraud charges for intentionally selling highly toxic products to thousands of innocent, unsuspecting women. Just 48 hours ago, he had desperately torn through his expensive house, screaming at Chloe and Tasha to frantically help him look for my old stolen laboratory notebooks, searching blindly for the missing chemical stabilizers. He had foolishly tried to throw his contracted manufacturing plant completely under the bus, loudly claiming corporate sabotage. But Tasha had turned on him. Tasha was completely panicking because she had heavily invested her own illicit bank loans directly into Darnell's massively failing company. She had come right to my underground lab, desperately begging for the chemical antidote, revealing through harsh, violent sobs that her own delicate edges were horribly falling out from using the stolen acidic product. I had coldly handed her a small silver mirror. "Looks like absolute loyalty comes with a steep price tag, Tasha," I had whispered right into her ruined face. Darnell needed a miracle tonight. He desperately needed to find the executives and beg for mercy. He was searching the lavish crowd, hoping to find a sympathetic face that could stop the corporate bleeding. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy, magnificent mahogany, double doors located firmly at the very top of the sweeping grand staircase slowly swung entirely open. The soft ambient string quartet music playing beautifully in the background seemed to completely falter for a tiny fraction of a brief second, as the collective curious gaze of the entire packed ballroom instantly shifted directly upward. Maya walks in. I stood beautifully at the very top of the elegant stairs, looking absolutely breathtaking. I was no longer the incredibly exhausted, neglected wife, quietly hiding in stained, baggy sweatpants. I wore an immaculate, extremely tailored, brilliant emerald green power suit that fit my body with absolute devastating precision. The incredibly deep, rich, jewel tone fabric contrasted absolutely perfectly against my glowing skin. My beautiful natural hair was styled flawlessly into an incredibly intricate, commanding crown. I walked slowly forward, displaying the steady, cold, predatory grace of a fierce woman who held every single powerful winning card tightly in her manicured hands. I was absolutely not walking alone. Walking intimately close right beside me was Valerie Thompson, the notoriously brilliant, legendary venture capitalist. And proudly walking firmly on my other side, displaying total immense respect, was the powerful chief executive officer of Lumiere Cosmetics himself. The three of us began deliberately descending the magnificent grand staircase, moving together in totally synchronized absolute corporate power. Excited, shocked whispers instantly erupted fiercely across the entire sprawling ballroom. The aggressive society photographers, who had previously completely ignored Beatrice, suddenly rushed violently forward, their massive camera flashes brightly illuminating the ornate staircase exactly like a fierce, rolling thunderstorm. They excitedly clamored for clear, unobstructed shots, recognizing the pure, immense gravity of the powerful billionaire company I was currently keeping. I kept my chin perfectly level, allowing the brilliant, blinding flashing lights to wash beautifully over me. We finally reached the bottom step, gracefully stepping smoothly onto the main ballroom floor. The wealthy elite crowd naturally parted, forming a respectful, clear pathway leading directly toward the glorious center of the massive room. And that was precisely when Darnell suddenly saw me. I watched the exact satisfying moment. Darnell's arrogant brain completely short-circuited. He practically saw blinding crimson red. His jaw literally fell open. He stared wide-eyed at the powerful CEO of Lumiere Cosmetics, and then he looked directly at me, standing radiantly right beside him. The crushing reality of his total, absolute, ultimate destruction violently crashed heavily down upon his sweating shoulders. Panic instantly mutated rapidly into violent, horribly irrational, desperate rage. Darnell aggressively shoved his way blindly through the tight crowd of wealthy, distinguished guests, utterly ignoring the deeply shocked, offended gasps of the important retail executives standing nearby. He charged recklessly toward Maya, his sweaty face heavily contorted into a pathetic mask of pure, unadulterated, furious desperation. He frantically waved his arms wildly, loudly, signaling the large, imposing event, security guards stationed closely near the entrance. "Get this woman out of here!" Darnell screamed, his voice cracking incredibly hysterically, loudly echoing terribly across the entire grand ballroom as he aggressively pointed a frantically shaking finger directly at my perfectly calm face. "She is a absolutely disgruntled, crazy ex-employee, maliciously trying to illegally extort my company. She has no invitation to be standing inside this building. Remove her immediately." The massive, extravagant ballroom suddenly fell completely, totally dead, incredibly silent. Two very large, muscular security guards immediately stepped briskly forward, moving very cautiously toward our powerful group. Chloe hurriedly scurried up right behind Darnell, her pretty face deeply flushed heavily with a pathetic, toxic mixture of severe embarrassment and incredibly nasty, incredibly vindictive, bitter anger. She looked me slowly up and down, angrily taking in my stunning, flawless emerald suit. Chloe sneers aggressively, crossing her thin arms tightly defensively across her chest. "You really do not know when to totally quit, do you, Maya?" she hissed incredibly sharply. "You think you can just sneak inside here and ruin this beautiful night?" Beatrice furiously stomped right up beside them, her cheap rented silver gown rustling aggressively loudly, pointing her manicured finger right at my extremely calm, composed face. I did not flinch at all. I simply stood perfectly still. The aggressive security guards reached their large, heavy hands firmly out, physically preparing aggressively to forcefully grab my arms violently and escort me outside. Darnell smiled a profoundly ugly, triumphant, terribly cocky, malicious sneer. But the guards completely failed to ever touch me. The powerful chief executive officer of Lumiere Cosmetics confidently, casually holds up a single, highly authoritative, extremely powerful hand, instantly, immediately, firmly stopping the massive security guards completely, totally, absolutely dead straight, right inside their very own precise, frantic tracks. The entire elegant room held its heavy breath. He smoothly, effortlessly takes the shiny, heavy steel microphone directly, swiftly, quickly, right from the tall, nearby wooden standing presentation podium. He adjusted his exquisite, immaculate, imported silk luxury tie, looking straight ahead at the disgraced, terrified, sweaty man, completely ruining his formal, beautiful, sophisticated corporate event. "Security, step back!" He calmly ordered, his voice echoing deeply, perfectly, powerfully, sharply, loudly, beautifully, throughout the entire massive ballroom. "You will not lay a single hand on this brilliant woman. You will absolutely not dare to ever disrespect her standing right here in my presence." He turned slightly warmly, gesturing toward me with a genuine look of profound, deep, absolute professional respect. Darnell watched in sheer, frozen, complete, absolute, horrifying, total, unadulterated shock as the handsome billionaire's CEO slowly and confidently smiled proudly, warmly at me. "You are deeply, pathetically, incredibly, totally mistaken about exactly who holds the real, actual, genuine, absolute power inside this elegant, magnificent room tonight, Darnell. She is certainly absolutely not a disgruntled ex-employee, and she is definitely absolutely not trespassing here tonight or any other night either. You will definitely, unequivocally, absolutely not ever dare to lay a hand on my new majority partner. This remarkable woman is the true creator behind the entire brand, and she now completely owns every single valuable asset you desperately tried to illegally, ruthlessly steal. Maya." The CEO stepped back gracefully, allowing me to take the center position on the stage. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and withdrew a small, sleek remote control. Without breaking his piercing eye contact with my ex-husband, he firmly pressed a single silver button. The massive digital presentation screen suspended high above the grand ballroom floor instantly flickered to life. They completely bypassed the scheduled promotional slideshow featuring Lumiere Cosmetics' upcoming winter product lines. Instead, the brilliant ultra-high-definition monitors projected a series of stark black and white legal documents. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of wealthy investors and retail executives as the gigantic crisp text filled the entire room. It was an official, unarguable display of United States Patent Office documentation. The specific patent for the revolutionary chemical hair stabilization technology was displayed boldly for every single industry leader to scrutinize. This was the exact proprietary technology Darnell had publicly claimed he invented in his kitchen, the technology he used to fraudulently secure his massive initial investments. The screen zoomed in closely on the legal ownership registry. The owner was not Darnell. The owner was not Crown and Glory. The legally recognized true owner was listed in bold, undeniable lettering as the Maya Jenkins Innovation Trust. Darnell physically stumbled backward, as if the massive digital projection had literally struck him across the face. His mouth opened and closed, but he could not produce a single sound. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, chalky gray under the harsh ballroom lighting. Beatrice let out a small, strangled gasp, pressing a manicured hand against her chest as she stared up at the screens. The wealthy elite crowd surrounding them instinctively took a collective step away, suddenly treating Darnell and his entire family like they were carrying a highly contagious disease. The whispers escalated into a low, dangerous rumble of angry corporate realization. I stepped forward and calmly took the heavy steel microphone directly from the CEO. The moment my fingers wrapped around the handle, the entire massive ballroom fell completely and totally dead silent. Hundreds of powerful industry leaders held their breath waiting for my next move. I looked directly down at Darnell. I saw the absolute terror vibrating through his shaking hands. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely ruined. You tried to sell a stolen defective draft to a global conglomerate, Darnell. I said, my voice ringing with crystal clear, unwavering authority across the silent room. You bypassed every single standard safety protocol because you were blinded by your own unearned greed. You stole draft number 4, a highly unstable acidic formula that causes severe chemical burns and total hair follicle destruction after exactly 90 days of shelf life. The silence in the room was deafeningly heavy. I paused, letting the immense gravity of his crimes sink into the minds of every executive present. You did not just steal my company, Darnell. I continued, my tone sharp and unforgiving. You did not just forge my signature and illegally strip away my financial assets. You poisoned thousands of black women for a quick paycheck. You shipped tens of thousands of bottles of a rapidly degrading acid directly into the homes of innocent consumers who trusted your brand. You traded their physical safety, their crowns, and their dignity for a leased mansion and a rented sports car. You built an entire empire on a ticking chemical time bomb, and tonight the clock finally struck 0. The retail buyers standing near the front of the stage began murmuring angrily among themselves, instantly calculating their own massive corporate liabilities. Several executives pulled out their phones, frantically typing out emergency orders to their distribution centers to pull every single bottle of Crown and Glory off their shelves immediately. Darnell was actively watching his entire retail network violently collapse in real time, right in front of his sweating face. Chloe suddenly shoved her way past a group of shocked investors, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperate rage. She pointed a shaking finger at the massive digital screens above us. That is a lie, Chloe screamed, her shrill voice echoing terribly across the elegant room. She is lying to all of you. She forged those patent documents. Darnell is the founder. He is the genius. She is just a bitter, broke ex-wife trying to ruin our beautiful life because she is jealous of my success. Arrest her. Somebody arrest her right now for corporate sabotage. Valerie Thompson, the legendary venture capitalist, standing to my right, let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that cut right through Chloe's hysterical screaming. Valerie stepped confidently up to the microphone, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. She adjusted her designer glasses and looked down at Chloe with absolute freezing contempt. Not only are these United States patent documents completely authenticated by my personal team of top-tier corporate attorneys, Valerie announced, her voice dripping with sheer authority, but we also have Darnell's explicit written confession. Valerie gestured toward the screen. The projection instantly shifted from the patent registry to a massive high-resolution screenshot of an email. It was the exact groveling, desperate email Darnell had sent to my old private address earlier that afternoon. The crowd began reading the message out loud. In the email, Darnell explicitly admitted he had absolutely no idea how the stabilization formula worked. He begged me to quietly fix the dangerous chemical breakdown, offering a pathetic $50,000 consulting fee to save his failing Lumiere deal. He had put his own total sheer incompetence and fraudulent actions directly into writing. "Your husband is not a genius," Chloe Valerie continued, her tone dropping to a dangerous clinical calm. "He is a common thief who engaged in massive corporate deception. And furthermore," Valerie added, leaning closer to the microphone, "operating a completely fraudulent limited liability company across state lines while actively soliciting millions of dollars from national retail investors constitutes federal wire fraud. You did not just violate consumer trust, Darnell. You violated federal law on a massive, unprecedented scale." Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic wail, collapsing dramatically against a nearby cocktail table. Her rented silver sequined gown snagged on the edge of a chair, tearing loudly, but no one rushed to help her up. The society photographers were rapidly snapping photos of the entire spectacular meltdown, documenting the absolute destruction of the fake cosmetic king. Chloe grabbed Darnell's arm, violently shaking him. "Do something," she shrieked hysterically. "Fix this, Darnell. Tell them they are lying. Fix this right now, or my father will personally destroy you." Darnell could not move. His eyes darted frantically toward the exit doors, but the crowd of angry executives had completely boxed him in. He was entirely trapped inside the very gala he had tried to crash. He was facing total unmitigated bankruptcy, millions of dollars in impending class action lawsuits, and the absolute destruction of his public reputation. He had absolutely nothing left. No company, no wealth, no future. I stood perfectly still on the stage, watching the inevitable consequence of his actions completely consume him. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I simply felt the profound weight of pure, untainted justice, finally restoring the balance of my stolen life. I had reclaimed my name, my science, and my future. The Maya Jenkins Innovation Trust was completely secured. Aura Noir was already generating millions in legitimate advance orders. I had won the war without ever compromising my integrity. Then the heavy brass handles of the grand ballroom double doors turned sharply. The thick wooden doors swung completely open, hitting the walls with a loud, definitive crack that immediately silenced the remaining chaotic chatter inside the room. Every single head in the massive gala simultaneously turned toward the main entrance. 4 serious, stern-looking individuals stepped into the brilliantly lit room. They wore dark, tailored suits and crisp navy blue windbreakers, with 3 bright yellow letters printed boldly across the back. FBI. The federal agents moved with absolute synchronized precision, cutting through the wealthy crowd like a sharpened blade. The retail executives and society guests quickly scrambled out of their way, forming a wide, clear path. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a grim expression, reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a dark leather wallet and flipped it open, flashing a gold shield directly under the bright crystal chandeliers. His eyes scanned the large ballroom with clinical efficiency, instantly bypassing the executives, the photographers, and the panicked catering staff. His hardened gaze locked onto his specific target with absolute certainty. The lead agent made direct, unwavering eye contact with Darnell. He stood completely still, letting the sheer terror wash over the disgraced fraud standing before him. The gala had officially transformed into a crime scene, and Darnell's stolen toxic reign over the cosmetic industry had finally met its ultimate demise. "Darnell Jenkins, you are officially under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and interstate distribution of hazardous materials," the stern agent announced. His authoritative voice sliced cleanly through the utterly silent, luxurious room, exactly like a freshly sharpened steel blade. The crushing gravity of those devastating words permanently shattered the last remaining fragile fragments of Darnell's completely artificial, incredibly arrogant protective facade. The absolute cold reality of his severe crimes finally caught up with him. His weak knees buckled almost instantly, giving out entirely beneath his incredibly expensive custom-tailored dark designer suit. He completely collapsed violently and pathetically onto the brilliantly polished hardwood floor, landing heavily right at the very tips of my pristine, expensive designer shoes. The exceptionally wealthy corporate crowd collectively gasped aloud, stepping even further and further back in visible deep disgust to actively avoid any physical or social association with the entirely disgraced sweating criminal. Darnell desperately reached out with terribly sweaty, aggressively shaking hands, blindly grabbing the crisp, impeccably tailored hem of my brilliant emerald green power suit pants. "Maya, please, please," he begged, his rapidly cracking voice breaking horribly into a high-pitched, deeply pathetic, desperate whine that echoed miserably across the vast open space. His terrified face was completely slick with heavy cold sweat, and thick wet tears were streaming continuously down his dark cheeks, completely ruining his meticulously groomed cosmetic appearance. "Please, you simply have to stop this, Maya. You have to fix this disaster immediately. Think of the innocent kids. I will eagerly, gladly give you the beautiful house back right now. I will instantly, voluntarily give you total, full legal custody, without fighting. I will enthusiastically give you absolutely every single thing you ever wanted in our entire marriage. Just please tell these federal agents it is a huge, profound misunderstanding. Tell them we were brilliantly, happily working closely together this entire time. Tell them I am innocent, Maya. I am begging you to save my life. I cannot go to federal prison. Please just tell them you forgive me." I looked coldly and calmly down at the pathetic, broken man kneeling on the floor. This was the exact same man who had previously locked me outside in the freezing, pouring rain. This was the man who had gleefully and maliciously stolen my entire brilliant life's work. He had confidently laughed directly in my face while actively trying to permanently destroy my professional sanity and reputation. I felt absolutely zero lingering emotional attachment to him. There was no residual anger, no sudden welling of pity, and most certainly not a single ounce of gentle mercy left in my heart. He was now just a hollow, completely empty shell of a human being, directly facing the severe, massive consequences he had so rigorously and successfully earned. I very slowly and deliberately reached my manicured fingers deeply into the inner silk-lined pocket of my perfectly tailored emerald blazer. My sensitive fingers gently brushed against the familiar crisp, worn edge of a highly specific piece of thin paper I had carefully kept closely with me ever since that profoundly terrible, stormy, rainy night. I slowly, precisely pulled out the exact same crumpled, creased $20 bill he had so incredibly arrogantly thrown directly at my weeping face when he aggressively kicked me straight out of our shared marital home. I gently smoothed out the deeply wrinkled green currency, slightly stretching it out perfectly flat between my fingertips, before purposefully leaning my body down, just close enough so his terrified ears could clearly hear every single quiet syllable perfectly. "Take your precious $20 right now and confidently call an Uber directly to the local police precinct, Darnell." I stated, my smooth voice resonating beautifully with freezing cold, absolute permanent finality. I gracefully released my fingers and deliberately dropped the slightly crumpled, worn paper bill perfectly into the fine silk breast pocket of his incredibly expensive custom-imported suit jacket. I thoroughly enjoyed watching the money lightly, slowly settle directly against the dark, luxurious fabric. Failures do not ever get temporary bail money. Darnell let out a horribly ragged, deeply desperate, agonizing loud sob. But the highly trained, serious FBI agents had already rapidly moved directly in. Two massive, extremely muscular agents firmly and aggressively grabbed his shaking arms easily, hauling him roughly and sharply right back to his trembling, unsteady feet. The incredibly heavy, thick metal police handcuffs clicked loudly, locking securely and echoing very sharply and brightly across the utterly massive, entirely silent grand room as they confidently and forcefully secured his tense, sweating wrists extremely tightly behind his broad back. Darnell heavily hung his defeated, sweating head, completely and totally defeated, thoroughly, unequivocally, and utterly broken. Another tall, swift, serious federal agent incredibly briskly approached a highly panicked Chloe, who was currently standing completely solidly paralyzed nearby. She instinctively backed hurriedly away, her wide, bright eyes incredibly huge with pure, sheer, unadulterated panic as the tall, stern agent very firmly grabbed her thin, shaking wrist. "You absolutely, positively cannot touch me, you monster!" Chloe screamed incredibly violently, furiously, thrashing heavily against the unmoving, stoic federal agent. "Do you even possibly know exactly who my powerful, wealthy father actually is in this town? I am a completely innocent, pure victim right here. He ruthlessly manipulated and lied to me too." The heavy, cold steel handcuffs snapped absolutely securely and tightly around her very delicate, pampered wrists, instantly and effectively silencing her pathetic physical resistance completely. Chloe frantically and aggressively scanned the surrounding incredibly luxurious sparkling VIP tables, actively searching deeply and desperately for her exceptionally wealthy influential parents. They were permanently securely seated very near the immaculate front row, having silently and deeply watched the entire incredibly spectacular dramatic corporate takedown fully and brilliantly unfold with absolute pure frozen absolute horror. When Chloe's highly panicked, wildly searching eyes finally met her stoic, powerful father's direct, harsh, freezing gaze, he absolutely completely refused to offer a single tiny shred of emotional comfort or loving paternal protection. His aging, wealthy face was a hard, solid, unmoving mask of totally cold, pristine corporate fury. He very slowly, incredibly deliberately stood directly up, methodically, and perfectly adjusting his imported custom-tailored dark tuxedo jacket before smoothly and calmly offering his strong arm gracefully to Chloe's equally horrified, silently fuming mother. Without even saying a single solitary tiny word to their distressed child, they actively and deliberately, completely turned their stiff, elegant backs directly on their wildly screaming, violently handcuffed, weeping daughter. They purposefully and successfully walked briskly, quickly, and totally out of the huge, grand, beautiful ballroom, absolutely and completely, entirely disowning her right there, completely on the very spot. They needed to perfectly and desperately protect their highly precious, incredibly vital, wealthy family brand, heavily from the rapidly spreading, insanely toxic criminal fallout. Chloe openly wailed incredibly loudly, terribly thrashing completely and uselessly as the highly focused agents rapidly began actively and forcefully marching both her and a completely silent broken Darnell directly toward the heavy massive wooden grand main exit doors. The fabulously and exceptionally wealthy attendees openly and hostilely glared directly at them, actively whispering deeply harsh, severe, cruel judgments as the completely disgraced, totally ruined criminal couple was deliberately and publicly paraded completely directly through the very vast crowded center of the shimmering, beautiful gala. Suddenly, a very loud, exceptionally dramatic, highly theatrical, completely shrill shriek, loudly and violently, pierced the softly murmuring, intensely gossiping, wealthy crowd. Beatrice, dramatically clutching her heaving chest heavily with both her shaking manicured hands, suddenly let out a massive, wildly exaggerated, completely theatrical, desperate loud gasp. Her terribly cheap, ill-fitting, rented, shiny silver sequined gown shimmered incredibly aggressively as she extremely forcefully and wildly fainted, heavily and awkwardly, collapsing directly onto the deeply carpeted floor, exactly smack in the absolute dead middle of the very busy main central walkway. She totally confidently expected a massive, sudden, rushing wave of highly concerned, terrified gasps. She absolutely expected wealthy, important, beautiful people to rapidly and immediately rush directly to her side and softly fan her supposedly sweating face. However, the surrounding church members who now knew the absolute truth simply stepped right cleanly over her, completely ignoring her dramatic performance entirely. Meanwhile, outside, Tasha's phone loudly rings. It is her bank. The illicit loans she took out using the completely fraudulent company's stock as collateral have officially defaulted. Her bank accounts are permanently frozen. The entire Jenkins family is penniless in a matter of seconds. She dropped her device onto the marble lobby floor, staring blankly ahead as her whole world completely shattered. The massive deception had finally reached its inevitable, absolutely devastating conclusion. Every stolen dollar, every fake smile, and every arrogant threat had officially evaporated into nothingness. They had played a dangerously high-stakes game of smoke and mirrors, attempting to build generational wealth on the backs of innocent women and stolen intellectual property today. Darnell Jenkins, you are officially under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and interstate distribution of hazardous materials, the stern lead agent announced. His authoritative voice sliced cleanly through the utterly silent, luxurious room exactly like a freshly sharpened steel blade. The crushing gravity of those devastating words permanently shattered the last remaining fragile fragments of Darnell's completely artificial, incredibly arrogant protective facade. The absolute cold reality of his severe crimes finally caught up with him. His weak knees buckled almost instantly, giving out entirely beneath his incredibly expensive custom-tailored dark designer suit. He completely collapsed violently and pathetically onto the brilliantly polished hardwood floor, landing heavily right at the very tips of my pristine, expensive designer shoes. The exceptionally wealthy corporate crowd collectively gasped aloud, stepping even further and further back, in visible deep disgust, to actively avoid any physical or social association with the entirely disgraced sweating criminal. Darnell desperately reached out with terribly sweaty, aggressively shaking hands, blindly grabbing the crisp, impeccably tailored hem of my brilliant emerald green power suit pants. "Maya, please, please," he begged, his rapidly cracking voice breaking horribly into a high-pitched, deeply pathetic, desperate whine that echoed miserably across the vast open space. His terrified face was completely slick with heavy cold sweat, and thick wet tears were streaming continuously down his dark cheeks, completely ruining his meticulously groomed cosmetic appearance. "Please, you simply have to stop this, Maya. You have to fix this disaster immediately. Think of the innocent kids. I will eagerly, gladly give you the beautiful house back right now. I will instantly, voluntarily give you total, full legal custody without fighting. I will enthusiastically give you absolutely every single thing you ever wanted. Please tell them this is a huge misunderstanding. Tell them I am absolutely innocent." I looked coldly and calmly down at the pathetic, broken man kneeling miserably on the floor. This was the exact same man who had previously locked me outside in the freezing, pouring rain. This was the man who had maliciously stolen my entire brilliant life's work. He had confidently laughed directly in my face while actively trying to permanently destroy my professional sanity and reputation. I felt absolutely zero lingering emotional attachment to him. There was no residual anger, no sudden welling of pity, and most certainly not a single ounce of gentle mercy left in my heart. He was now just a hollow, completely empty shell of a human being, directly facing the severe, massive consequences he had so rigorously and successfully earned. I very slowly and deliberately reached my manicured fingers deeply into the inner silk-lined pocket of my perfectly tailored emerald blazer. My sensitive fingers gently brushed against the familiar crisp, worn edge of a highly specific piece of thin paper I had carefully kept closely with me ever since that profoundly terrible, stormy, rainy night. I slowly, precisely pulled out the exact same crumpled, creased $20 bill he had so incredibly arrogantly thrown directly at my weeping face when he aggressively kicked me straight out of our shared marital home. I gently smoothed out the deeply wrinkled green currency, slightly stretching it perfectly flat between my fingertips, before purposefully leaning my body down, just close enough so his terrified ears could clearly hear every single quiet syllable perfectly. "Take your precious $20 and call an Uber to the precinct." "Darnell," I stated, my smooth voice resonating beautifully with absolute permanent finality. I released my fingers, dropping it directly into his breast pocket. "Failures do not get bail money," he sobbed loudly, crying out miserably. Darnell let out a horribly ragged, deeply desperate, agonizing loud sob, but the highly trained, serious FBI agents had already rapidly moved directly in. Two massive, extremely muscular agents firmly and aggressively grabbed his shaking arms easily, hauling him roughly and sharply right back to his trembling, unsteady feet. The incredibly heavy, thick metal police handcuffs clicked loudly, locking securely and echoing very sharply and brightly across the utterly massive, entirely silent grand room as they confidently and forcefully secured his tense, sweating wrists extremely tightly behind his broad back. Darnell heavily hung his defeated, sweating head, completely and totally defeated, thoroughly, unequivocally, and utterly broken. Another tall, swift, serious federal agent incredibly briskly approached a highly panicked Chloe, who was currently standing completely solidly paralyzed nearby. She instinctively backed hurriedly away, her wide, bright eyes incredibly huge with pure, sheer, unadulterated panic as the tall, stern agent very firmly grabbed her thin, shaking wrist. "You absolutely positively cannot touch me, you monster!" Chloe screamed incredibly violently, furiously thrashing heavily against the unmoving stoic federal agent. "Do you even possibly know exactly who my powerful, wealthy father actually is in this town? I am a completely innocent, pure victim right here. He ruthlessly manipulated and lied to me too." The heavy cold steel handcuffs snapped absolutely securely and tightly around her very delicate pampered wrists, instantly and effectively silencing her pathetic physical resistance completely. Chloe frantically and aggressively scanned the surrounding incredibly luxurious sparkling VIP tables, actively searching deeply and desperately for her exceptionally wealthy influential parents. They were permanently securely seated very near the immaculate front row, having silently and deeply watched the entire incredibly spectacular dramatic corporate takedown fully and brilliantly unfold, with absolute pure frozen, absolute horror, continuously observing every single detail of her devastating massive failure. When Chloe's highly panicked, wildly searching eyes finally met her stoic, powerful father's direct, harsh, freezing gaze, he absolutely completely refused to offer a single tiny shred of emotional comfort or loving paternal protection. His aging, wealthy face was a hard, solid, unmoving mask of totally cold, pristine corporate fury. He very slowly, incredibly deliberately stood directly up, methodically, and perfectly adjusting his imported, custom-tailored dark tuxedo jacket, before smoothly and calmly offering his strong arm gracefully to Chloe's equally horrified, silently fuming mother. Without even saying a single solitary tiny word to their distressed child, they actively and deliberately, completely turned their stiff, elegant backs directly on their wildly screaming, violently handcuffed daughter. They purposefully and successfully walked briskly, quickly, and totally out of the huge, grand, beautiful ballroom, absolutely and completely entirely disowning her right there, completely on the very spot. They needed to perfectly and desperately protect their highly precious, incredibly vital, wealthy family brand, heavily from the rapidly spreading, insanely toxic criminal fallout. Chloe openly wailed incredibly loudly, terribly thrashing completely and uselessly as the highly focused agents rapidly began actively and forcefully marching both her and a completely silent broken Darnell directly toward the heavy, massive wooden grand main exit doors. The fabulously and exceptionally wealthy attendees openly and hostilely glared directly at them, actively whispering deeply harsh, severe, cruel judgments as the completely disgraced, totally ruined criminal couple was deliberately and publicly paraded completely directly through the very vast crowded center of the shimmering beautiful gala, leaving behind only shock and sheer total absolute unending devastating utter disgrace in their extremely messy, highly chaotic path. Suddenly, a very loud, exceptionally dramatic, highly theatrical, completely shrill shriek loudly and violently pierced the softly murmuring, intensely gossiping wealthy crowd. Beatrice, dramatically clutching her heaving chest heavily with both her shaking manicured hands, suddenly let out a massive, wildly exaggerated, completely theatrical, desperate loud gasp. Her terribly cheap, ill-fitting, rented shiny silver sequined gown shimmered incredibly aggressively as she extremely forcefully and wildly fainted heavily and awkwardly, collapsing directly onto the deeply carpeted floor, exactly smack in the absolute dead middle of the very busy main central walkway. She totally confidently expected a massive sudden rushing wave of highly concerned, terrified gasps. She absolutely expected wealthy, important, beautiful people to rapidly and immediately rush directly to her side and softly fan her supposedly sweating face. However, the surrounding church members who now perfectly knew the absolute truth simply stepped right cleanly over her, completely ignoring her dramatic performance entirely. Meanwhile, miles away outside the massive event, Tasha's cellular phone loudly, violently rings. It is her primary major corporate bank. The illicit loans she desperately took out illegally, using the completely fraudulent company's stock exactly as collateral, have officially, catastrophically defaulted. Her multiple extensive bank accounts are entirely permanently frozen. The entire deeply corrupted Jenkins family is completely, hopelessly penniless, in a mere matter of absolutely devastating seconds. She dropped her expensive device straight onto the hard marble lobby floor, staring blankly straight ahead as her whole entire world completely violently shattered. The massive deception had finally successfully reached its inevitable, absolutely devastating, terrible conclusion. Every single stolen dollar, every single fake smile, and every extremely arrogant, vicious threat had officially permanently evaporated completely into pure sheer nothingness. They had played a dangerously, incredibly high-stakes game of dark, heavy smoke and shiny, fragile mirrors, attempting hopelessly to build lasting generational wealth entirely upon the heavily burdened backs of innocent, trusting women and my stolen proprietary intellectual property, safely fully reclaimed by me here perfectly today. I listened to the desperate, frantic, shaking voice echoing through the receiver. Darnell was rambling uncontrollably, his usual arrogant cadence completely replaced by a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He begged for mercy for commissary money for just a tiny fraction of the wealth he believed I owed him for the years we spent together. I watched the digital timer on my phone screen silently ticking upward. I gave him exactly 10 seconds to pour out his pathetic apologies and incredibly transparent manipulations. When the timer hit the 10-second mark, I took a deep cleansing breath. You told me once that absolute success requires the constant anticipation of obstacles, Darnell. I said, my voice perfectly smooth and completely devoid of any lingering emotional attachment. Consider this your final obstacle. I did not wait to hear his response. I firmly pressed the red button to end the call. I immediately opened my phone settings and permanently blocked the federal penitentiary's outgoing number. I embraced the sheer magnitude of total victory washing completely over me. He was finally paying the ultimate price for his ruthless greed. As the screen went dark, I felt an incredible, profound physical release. There was absolutely no lingering anger inside my heart anymore. There was no resentment and no desire for further revenge. There was only absolute, total, and complete closure. The heavy, toxic weight I had carried for years simply evaporated into the cool evening air. The scene smoothly transitioned forward as the warm Georgia sun rose over a magnificent, pristine glass building located directly in the bustling heart of downtown Atlanta. Today was the highly anticipated grand opening of the massive official Aura Noir corporate headquarters. The sprawling state-of-the-art facility was an absolute triumph of modern architectural design, featuring incredibly bright, open-concept workspaces and massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The true beating heart of the entire operation was the expansive state-of-the-art research and development laboratory located on the main floor. The pristine lab was currently buzzing with vibrant, exciting energy. Brilliant, highly educated, diverse women in crisp white coats moved purposefully between the gleaming stainless steel workstations, operating highly advanced chemical mixing equipment and analyzing fresh organic compounds. This was my ultimate vision finally brought perfectly into glorious, tangible reality. I walked through the gleaming corridors, watching my incredible team completely revolutionize the global cosmetic industry. Jamal stood proudly near the massive loading docks, actively managing the entire global logistics department. He looked incredibly sharp in a tailored dark blue suit, holding a digital tablet, and confidently directing the seamless flow of massive international outgoing shipments. He was visibly thriving, highly respected by every single employee, and completely living his absolute best life, far away from Darnell's toxic, empty threats. He had fiercely protected my dream during its most vulnerable infancy, and now he was rightfully sharing the massive reward. He caught my eye and offered a huge, genuine, bright smile, raising his coffee cup in a silent, cheerful salute. I smiled warmly back at Jamal before making my way up the floating glass staircase toward the executive suites. My private corner office was a spectacular testament to pure, unyielding perseverance. It featured panoramic sweeping views overlooking the entire beautiful Atlanta skyline. Valerie Thompson was already waiting comfortably inside, sitting gracefully on a plush velvet sofa, holding two delicate crystal flutes of exceptionally rare expensive champagne. She wore a stunning tailored ivory suit that perfectly commanded the elegant room. The office walls were absolutely not decorated with generic meaningless corporate artwork. Instead, hanging prominently directly behind my massive polished mahogany desk was the beautifully framed original United States Patent Office document. Valerie stood up smoothly as I entered the beautiful sunlit office. She extended one crystal flute toward me, her eyes shining with fierce pride and immense mutual respect. I proudly accepted the offering, feeling the deeply satisfying, incredibly heavy weight of pure, ultimate vindication settling securely within me. The heavy gold frame perfectly highlighted the bold black ink declaring the Maya Jenkins Innovation Trust as the sole undeniable creator. To the woman who completely rewrote the rules, Valerie said, her voice ringing with genuine admiration. You did not just build a company, Maya. You built an absolute fortress. We gently clinked our expensive crystal glasses together, the sharp, clear sound ringing perfectly across the large executive space. I took a slow, appreciative sip of the crisp champagne and walked quietly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The vibrant evening sky was currently painting the sprawling city in breathtaking, brilliant shades of deep, rich violet and fiery, burning gold. As I stood there silently watching the glorious sunset paint the horizon, I allowed my mind to briefly wander backward. I vividly remembered the freezing cold pouring rain soaking right through my thin clothes. I remembered the absolute crushing, terrifying weight of standing completely alone on a dark suburban sidewalk, having absolutely nothing except $80 to my entire name. I remembered the incredibly toxic, arrogant family that had maliciously, ruthlessly, systematically tried to completely bury me alive beneath their mountains of filthy lies and staggering deception. They had viciously pushed me directly into the deep dark soil, entirely expecting me to simply rot away and disappear forever. But they were deeply, fundamentally, horribly wrong. They did not realize she was a seed. I turned away from the beautiful glass window, slowly looking back toward the bustling, bright laboratory floor, visible through the interior glass walls. A profound, genuine, incredibly peaceful smile spread slowly, completely across my face. The terrified, broken woman, who was aggressively, viciously thrown out into the freezing storm with absolutely nothing, was entirely gone. I had finally permanently broken their heavy, suffocating chains, forging an incredibly spectacular, breathtaking new destiny entirely on my own. I am now the completely undeniable, powerful, undisputed queen of my own magnificent empire, ruling a brilliant, beautiful, spectacular life where absolutely no one will ever dictate my worth again.